Hey famous warrior, welcome back to our channel. Today I have a friend, a well-known person. I think I'm even like feeling really honored that she's here. But today I have a good treat for you guys. We're gonna be talking all things mental health in hopes that it can help you guys figure out where you are on the spectrum or in this conversation that's happening. So I have Dr. Maria Akani Sichembe. She is a psychologist, psychiatrist, entrepreneur, author, speaker, international speaker, if I can add. And she's here just to share, not just to share her expertise in her field, but also her faith as well. And her experience doing all the things from momming, wifing, business, everything. So I hope that you guys find this conversation enlightening, educational, and entertaining. Thank you for being here, for making the time. I know you're a super busy person, but I appreciate you taking the time to be here to share in this conversation, this global conversation that's happening about mental health, but not as a novice, as somebody who is in the trenches of the mental health field. So I really appreciate you being here and taking the time to sit with me.
I'm glad to be here, and thank you for having me.
Awesome. So we always start with trying to get the viewers to learn a little bit more about you, so that even as they listen to you, they kind of feel like they know you, like you're their friend. So please share 5 fun facts about yourself.
Okay, so one, I'm an ambivert.
Okay.
A lot of people think that I'm an extrovert, but no, I think I am an ambivert because I have very strong introverted characteristics.
Yeah.
2, one of my favorite things to do is to put my kids to bed.
Really?
Yep.
Okay.
I love to do that. The hugs, the kisses, the singing, and the storytelling at bed. Yeah, it's a very intimate moment for me. And even if I've had a really hard day, that's something I look forward to. And if I haven't done it for some time, I feel like I haven't been refreshed. Thirdly, I read a lot. I read for entertainment. I read for learning.
Yeah.
And recently I learned that I can read in all manner of ways, including audio books. So I've been doing a lot of that. Yeah, I suppose fine to know. Right?
Yes,
I like cooking.
Okay.
Yeah.
What kind of food do you like to cook?
I don't know if I've ever thought about a type of food per se. Like, is it a cuisine of some kind? No, I think I just have favorite foods that I would say, okay, I'd like to make a stir fry, and then I enjoy that. I'd like to make a certain stew, certain bakes. So I don't know if you would classify that in a particular. I never really thought about that.
Okay.
And my son thinks I'm the best cook in the whole wide world. Yeah. What's the 5th thing? I like to exercise. I'm not always able to do it, but I do like to exercise. It does something to me in centering me and giving me a balance.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay. So to lay the foundation for the conversation we're going to have, which is mental health and all things mental health. What is mental health? I know you get asked this question a lot. So what is mental health? And in your opinion, add to that why you think mental health is such a hot topic lately.
Okay, so it's funny that I have to define it like this.
I know, right?
But I still will. So mental health is really about the person you are, because when you think about it, like the headquarters of who you are is your brain.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's where you filter the world through. and that is what you interact with the world. And everything you see and make an opinion of is based on how you translate and make sense of it in your brain. Your values, your loves, everything is really on your brain.
Yeah.
So I hope it makes sense when I say mental health is who you are, like who you are as a person. And when we talk about being healthy, we mean, are you growing as a person? Are you thriving? Are you being able to live at your full potential? And I think that it's a realization. Why it's a hot topic now, it's a realization. Like, a lot of times people have tried to make all kinds of interventions for health. You know, they found out about nutrition, and they thought, once we give people nutrition, they'll be happy.
Yeah.
And they found out about, treatment and drugs, and they figured, once we do that, people will be happy. And then they realized, like, after people have health and they have nutrition and they have jobs, when, we're post the depression,
Yeah.
and people have basic needs, they have food, they need something more.
Yeah.
And then they realize that, actually, it's about the person inside. And that's why you can have two people, one who has everything and one who has nothing. And the one with nothing is absolutely happy. And the one who has everything is absolutely depressed.
Yeah.
So it's that recognition that actually there's more beyond meeting the external needs of people that we need to look at in terms of life and living and coming to the fullness of it.
Wow. Okay. I want to unpack this phrase that I keep hearing, and I wonder if you've heard it too, or what your thoughts are about it. And it's the phrase global trauma. And I keep hearing it in reference to how we've all been through the trauma of COVID as a worldwide situation, and how it's affected us in different ways. And I know, like, off the bat, the first thing that you'd think of when you think of the trauma experienced because of COVID is obviously the death toll that it took. And then the next thing that usually you think about is the economic repercussions that kind of have been happening because of that. But when people say global trauma, or like a trauma that we've all experienced, what are your thoughts about that? And do you think that it's true that we have all kind of been through this global trauma because of the pandemic?
I think it's true. I think that we have, and I think that's one of the reasons why there's been a lot of recognition for mental health.
Yeah.
I think that, before the issue would be, are you dead or dying? And you're not dead and dying.
Yeah.
Did you lose a job?
Yeah.
No. But then why are you affected?
Yeah.
So that recognition that there was just a season when everyone was sad and depressed, and bad news was every day.
Yeah.
And you sort of have to work at numbing yourself because there's too much allocation of your emotional resources to the negative side.
I know, right?
Yes. So, and then there's people that that you're losing at a very fast rate. And even those that you don't lose, there's the near loss that happened. And for some, it was their own experiences. I mean, I personally saw a number of people who had a lot of nightmares and flashbacks because they themselves thought they were going. A friend of mine was sharing, being in COVID ICU, and one evening his neighbor, they were rushing and resuscitating him, and he died. And then the other one rushed and resuscitated, died, and the other one, and like you wake up in the morning and you wonder, like, am I alive or dead? So that can be very traumatic. But also the fact that the world was forced to stop.
Yeah.
Like, you just had to stop.
Yeah.
You couldn't continue with normal ways of doing things. Like, how in the world does a handshake become dangerous?
Or a hug. Like, I'm such a hugger, but it's like, now I'm still awkward about hugs because you don't know whether the person is comfortable with being hugged now or not. Like, it's just become weird. Yes.
And like, people connect with facial expression, and then that's taken away from. So there's like this blunting of life, communication and socialization, expressions of, whether physical or emotional in your face or anything was just blunted. So just that aspect of people having to stop, I think really affected the world in a lot of ways. And even those that felt like they couldn't be stopped because life continued in their places. Like, I mean, I'm just thinking about some of my relatives in Australia.
By hook or by crook, guys, we are going to continue.
Yes, so some of my relatives in Australia, and their life was really, we could go to the mall, but they couldn't come home to Zambia for like 2 years. The world couldn't get into Australia. People couldn't get out, and they were kind of a weird lot in the world. So whether you liked it or not, there was a way in which people just had to stop and pay attention to something beyond what they've done every day. Yeah.
As leaders, whether as entrepreneurs who are employers, or even when we look at church leadership, Christian leadership, what are some things you would want to highlight to leaders about ways that they can be sensitive to the fact that people under their leadership are dealing with this post-traumatic stress, whether it's diagnosed or undiagnosed, but they're dealing with this. It's a reality that we can't avoid. And how do we lead in such a climate?
I think that firstly, when it comes to the church, it's important to recognize that, and I know when I say this it's going to be controversial, but like the truth of the matter is that not everything is spiritual. Yes, everything may be related to God, but not everything is spiritual. Not everything needs to be cast out, anointed with oil. And some of it just needs conversation. And we see that Jesus did that with different people. For some, he laid his hands. For some, he had conversations. And people had to make sense and make decisions out of conversations. And some of them, it was just listening to them that made them, reflect and reason and get a hold of their lives. So I think that that's important, that the church recognizes that. I think that also in terms of entrepreneurs and leaders in the world, leadership has looked different for different reasons. I know that there are companies that have not gone back to working on site. They're still working remotely. And that has added advantages for some people because then, they can spend time with their families or live in other places. It has also added its challenges. Just last week, I was talking to a client who said, "Look, I don't know if I can do this remote therapy. Like, I want to be in the same room with the therapist. Yes, I want them to see my full body, what I do to my hands or my feet and tap, and things like that." And so that recognition that the world has changed a lot. Like, I think that during COVID, there was an acceleration of use of technology and being able to connect remotely and what it has done. I'll give an example of my children. My children were homeschooled for like a couple of years or so, and then getting into school, it's like they just didn't know the social norms, that they were totally disoriented, and it was a whole process of trying to get them to socialize, because it wasn't just not going to school, it was not visiting because play dates were not available, it was not going to church, to Sunday school. So it was now them learning, social norms again. I remember walking into someone's house and my son went right into the kitchen and said, "Oh, there's cake, can we have cake?" I said, "You can't do that." I said, "Why?" I said, "Well, because what if they don't want to give us?" And they said, "But how will they know that we want?" So we had a whole conversation, and I realized that it was at a critical point, at the point when he was like 6, 7, that COVID came, and for like 2 years, there was none of that. And then now there's, and we would have issues to do with play dates at school and, all those things. But what that also did to millennials or Gen Z is that already with the accelerated technology, their social skills have been affected. And they think it's normal to write a WhatsApp to your boss and, just communicate important information. I'm serious.
Oh my gosh, yes. Yes, I'm so
Yes.
glad that you're talking about that.
Yes.
Yes, people are resigning on WhatsApp. It's like, do you know that a resignation has to be in right? Like, yes, please talk about that.
And I think this is something that also Simon Sinek spoke about in terms of how they break up. You know, you just ghost somebody, and then now you have to be in real life and workplace and face people. You don't even know how to deal with that, because on WhatsApp you just ghost people, you know, all these things, and you have new problems. No, I was catfished, whatnot. Like, what is that? You know, those things wouldn't happen in our time, because you always meet people, you always get to know them, where they come from, and so on. But now there's this virtual world where people really believe they live. And they really believe that it's real life and interaction, even if somebody else may actually be interacting, which is kind of, I think, unfair, because for some, they come with their authentic self, and then others are not playing by the same rules, and it's complex. So that also has brought in other mental health problems, a lot of bullying that is going on online, and you can't stop it, you know, because you can't just, it's different if people are being bullied in school, you can just whip them, but if it's on social media, it's so vast, the way to control it and manage it, it just,
so speaking about the social media age, we have post-pandemic age, and then we have the fact that we're in a social media age. As parents who, our kids, all they know is screens, you know, it's not like in our time where, yes, there were phones, but you were told, okay, you can only get a phone when you're 16 or when you're 18. Now our kids have tablets and they need gadgets for school and all that stuff. There's coding classes, and like, that's the era in which they live. And as parents, how do we balance between making them relevant in the social media era, but then also protecting them from things that you've mentioned, like cyberbullying and addictive behavior on social media, and, you know, thinking life can be fake in this make-believe world, and also things like social anxiety, like all these things that kind of pop up because of this bubble that they're kind of living in. How do you, as a professional, what advice would you give to parents about how we can kind of walk the middle ground with all of that?
Yeah, I think it's really challenging, because I'm just thinking about a couple of Christians who actually were surprised that my kids watch TV. So, and then that's just TV. So then, you know, we have the tablets, and I've kind of been unhappy with my son's school that keeps sending homework that requires him to use a tablet and so on. But I think that the better thing to do is to set goals. What is it that you want your child to be able to do? So, of course, you want them to navigate life in terms of technology and things like that, and also to excel in class like every other child. But you also have to think about other goals. What do you want them to do? You want them to be able to be creative. They're growing up in Zambia, for example. Can they go to the village and play?
Without a gadget?
Yes, without a gadget, you know. Can they interact and be creative with their hands and draw and all that? So I think that when you, and then also you want them to develop adequate social skills.
Yeah.
So I think that when you think about what it is that you're trying to achieve, then you can build activities around that. And I think that that's the easier thing to do. So for us, one of the things that, you know, we notice that, you know, my son is very much into TV. But if you take away the TV, he is very creative. So we limit how much TV he watches. We limit how much TV he watches, how much time he has with his tablet. And we create these opportunities where, you know, you just have to be creative, because it's not yet...
Boredom is a gift.
Yes. we actually, you know, I know it sounds very traditional, but when I was growing up, TV started at 5.
Yeah.
So in our house, TV starts at 4. So I think it's an improvement from.
So they have no TV even like in the mornings.
No. Whether they're on holiday or not, they have no TV until 4, and then they can watch TV, and then they have a bedtime as well. So between 4 and their bedtime at 8, there is dinner somewhere, there is bathing somewhere, there's whatever. So it's not like they have straight TV during that time. And then there's also the bedtime routines that we do. You know, there's a book we read and so on. So we also try to get them into reading books, which I think books also introduce a whole world of imagination that is very good for children. And that's one of the down parts about TV, that it's like everything is already imagined for them. But then also one of the things I realize is that there's so much that they're also learning from TV. So what I'm very deliberate about is that I try as much as possible to acquaint myself with everything that they will watch. We limit the channels that they watch. And if I can watch a movie before, it doesn't always work out, but definitely the rating is focused on and so on, so that even while they're watching TV, it's not empty entertainment. It's also an opportunity for them to learn and ask questions. And there's a lot that they're learning, which some of it I don't even teach them. I'm just like, I didn't know that there were so many types of dinosaurs. I didn't know, you know. So I guess that's one of the things. I think also just being present, because I think that it's hard to direct and guide your child if you leave them alone. So trying to be present when they're interacting with the TV, when they're interacting with this device, so that you can see what's popping up, and you can, you know, have an interaction with them. And some of the pop-ups are crazy. Like you're wondering, is this for kids or you know? So just being present so you can have those conversations, I think is quite important.
Okay. I've heard you either say this in person or on your social media or both. People always ask you, what do you do when you need therapy? You know, and you're always so candid about the fact that you do go for therapy, whether it's one-on-one or in group settings. So as a mom, because you've just spoken about your kids and all that, so as a mom and a professional in the mental health sector, what do you do to take care of your mental health?
So I think I try to, first of all, practice what I preach. I focus on the 8 dimensions of wellness, because I know that they really work. So I focus on them. So I enjoy my work. So that's a no-brainer. I physically try to exercise, and I make sure that I am constantly renewing my spiritual beliefs. I pray. I do spend time investing spiritually, and I do invest in meaningful friendships that help to steady me. And financially, I also practice to the best of my abilities financial wellness. So manage my debt, try to live within my means, manage my contentment and my plans and things like that. And in terms of my environment, I deliberately try to keep a garden and all that, because, you know, the closeness to nature and all that. And intellectually, I do, I think I did mention that I read a lot. So I read a lot, and I also am one person who is a learner. So I keep learning. Sometimes I learn from conversations I have with people. I think I ask a lot of curious questions. And I also set aside time for goal setting and things like that. Yeah, so in one way, one of the things I try to do is to keep the wellness balance okay. In other ways, I think another thing is I'll look at a particular need I have. I think I mentioned earlier, well, before the show started, that I started listening to James Dobson, New Strong-Willed Child, because my child is testing the limits, and I want to make sure that, you know, I am learning how to overcome some of the possible areas of stress. And yes, depending on what I'm going through, what season I'm going through in life, if I feel totally overwhelmed or something, I will sign up for therapy. And I think the other thing that I would also do is just make sure that a particular area of focus that I need to work on, I am reading up on it, seeking accountability and working on. Right now, one of the issues I'm working on is my health. I've noticed recently my numbers are not too good. So deliberately working on my exercise, my diet, and my weight management.
Okay. So you've said two things that have kind of jumped out at me, and I want to unpack before I move on. The first is goal setting, and then the second is your reference to how often you do therapy. So with relation to goal setting, and you doing all the things and wearing all the hats, the mom hat, the wife hat, the entrepreneur, the manager, the doctor, all these things that you're doing, how in the world did you find time to write your book? And how long did it take you? Like, for someone out there that's has been inspired by the fact that you've written a book and they feel like they want to write a book, but they feel like they don't have time. How did you kind of manage your life in a way to make that possible?
Firstly, it took me 3 years to write the book.
Okay.
Yeah, I wrote it in bits and pieces, and at first I think I didn't really have like a goal of when I wanted to finish it, but then once I set that, then I had to work towards it. Okay. So in terms of goal setting, I put my life in categories, and then I set goals for each category. And then I allocate time for those.
What are some of the categories?
So parenting, for example, there'll be some things that I'll be working on, and I'll be thinking, okay, so we need to get, so like the big thing right now that I need to get to is I need to get my kids to being able to wash dishes on their own. So it started with making sure you wash your plate and cup and spoon or whatever it is when you finish, and that's working really well. So I know the next goal is to get to that, and I'm waiting for a holiday to do that. Okay. And so then I try to think about what will make that easier. So for example, I think the dish rack we had before was a little complex, so when the kids tried to put on the so then I have to think about, okay, so I have to make sure that dish rack is, so small things like small things like that would help me to achieve that. And then now start orienting the maid to the fact that we are moving to this, so we have to be on the same page, right. And because sometimes it's easier for her to just clean up, so you want to make sure that so parenting is one. The other one is maybe like my physical health. So I'll be working at maybe, like I think I mentioned earlier, I'm working at dealing with my blood pressure, dealing with my weight, working at my sleep goals, trying to make sure I sleep enough, and what am I going to do to make sure my bedtime is this time and all that. So then I really sit down and reflect on that. The other is financial. I'll be working towards raising a certain amount of money, trying to buy something, trying to do an investment, and all that. So basically what I do is I have retreats very often, and for example, every second Monday I clear out my day, and that's my day to now check in, because I feel like, well, let me not say I feel like, I work all the time. So that's like my day to make sure that I am not working and I am now stopping to take stock. Right. What's going on? How is it going with the parenting? How is it going with the weight? How is it going with work? How is it going with all this? And how can I make this better? So I think that's one of the things that helps me to be more efficient, like the check-ins. Then I say, okay, so I'll be saying I've been writing a book. What have I done so far? What am I working on? How am I dealing with this? So I think that's one thing I do with the goal setting. How did I manage to write the book? I think that, so like I said, at first I was doing it leisurely, so it was a little different. But also one thing I'll tell you that, writing the book was one of the most rewarding and fulfilling experiences. So I actually enjoyed it. So all I had to do was set aside time. And once I did that, I had such a good time writing and perceiving the reader and what kind of interaction they would have with the material, researching, and then I'll set appointments so maybe I set appointments with people who've written before so that I can find out what they're doing. I actually ask somebody to hold me accountable, and I'll check in every time. This is how far I've gone, this is what I've done with this, and looked around, since I read so many books, just what have other authors done in that regard. So it was easier, I think. One thing I do think that would have made a difference was if I had, I don't know if it's a dictaphone or dicto app, because there was so many times that I had a thought while I was driving, and I would, think it would be nice if I would just be able to dictate this. And sometimes, while I'm walking, I have the thoughts and they're coming really well, but I needed to write them down. And I guess by now maybe they've developed those kinds of apps. I didn't have access to that. And so I think that would have helped. So if someone's writing a book, I think the first thing I would say is just start. Just start writing. You don't have to have all the thoughts in line or the order, because sometimes people think, do you have to have the structure? No. So just write it, and I assume you're typing, so you can always rearrange it later and so on, but just write all the thoughts. And sometimes you realize maybe this theme is not for this book,
right,
but maybe this is, but you don't know until you've written it down. So just write it.
So the second thing is, you alluded to going to therapy, checking into therapy if there's something overwhelming or there's something that you are dealing with at the time. And I think there's kind of two schools of thought in that regard. There's ones that do what you do, where therapy is periodic. If I'm dealing with something emotionally overwhelming, or maybe there's been a loss and I need some grief therapy, then I do it as and when I need it. And then there are other people that I've heard that are of the view that one must be in therapy all the time. Like, it's a perpetual thing. It's just a maintenance thing. If it's every week or if it's every other week, but that must just be the standard. So what are your thoughts about that, as people are getting more and more comfortable with the idea of going to professional therapy as opposed to, the other methods that we've used in the past, maybe go to see a pastor or things like that, but now people are wanting to invest even the money in their mental health by going to a trained professional therapist. So what's the best approach? Is it one must always be in therapy, or it's as and when life is happening? And what cues do you use to, if you go down that route, what cues do you use to kind of let yourself know that, okay, it's time that I need to get a check-in?
I think that you don't have to be in therapy like gym class. Yeah, seriously.
Always and forever.
Remember, it's therapy. It's like physiotherapy. You don't keep going for physiotherapy unless there's something, but you can continue exercising. So with therapy, it's a treatment. And you only treat if there's a problem, So one of the things I've seen, and even with my clients, I tried to help them to see, is that therapy is an artificial relationship. So that's why it has all these boundaries. You have to make an appointment. You can't just call them at 02 and share, what you're going through. The ideal is that you should have social supports, friends, relationships that help you through life. But we do know that some things can get overwhelming. So the role of your therapist is to help you to be able to live an independent life, to live a full life dependent on them. Your therapist is not like your buddy, and that's one of the problems that you sometimes find when people are in therapy for a long time. You can actually see that they're actually scratching for a problem. And some of the conversations, that, if you had a good friend, this is a conversation you would have with a good friend. And I guess if you have the money, you can just go and pay for it. But then what that means is that you take away from your life, from building in those social relationships that you need to have, your everyday buddies who you can call and say, what do you think about this? Did you see this? I'm feeling a bit upset today. I just wondered, would you like to have coffee with me, and things like that. So yeah, basically therapy is a treatment, and unless you have an issue that is constantly stressing you and you feel overwhelmed constantly, you do not need to be in therapy all the time. Is it important to come in and check every so often? Yeah, I think it would be good for you to check, because sometimes it's about whether you're having proper adaptations or not to different situations. But I definitely think that, therapy is something that you should just do as and when you have an issue that requires intervention.
So to just give further guidance before I move on to the next question, when you say as and when, what are some, because as Africans, I think we're just, structured to just deal with tough stuff. We just, no one has time to feel bad or to whatever. So to help people know, okay, this is a situation where I need help. What are some life stuff that you would say, okay, if you're going through these 1, 2, 3, 4 things, then definitely try and seek therapy?
I'm not sure I should say if you're going through 1, 2, 3, 4 things, because even then people deal with things very differently. A Facebook scandal for one person may mean something totally different. For someone, it may be life-threatening. But I think I would say that if you find yourself disrupted from your day-to-day, you can't concentrate because you have a problem that is affecting you, and you have tried to pursue maybe your current support networks or your current strategies, and you feel that you're still not coping. So you're not able to sleep, you're having panic attacks, and you find yourself unable to control your emotion. You're constantly going down in a downward spiral, sad and depressed, and you find yourself losing attention, not making rational decisions. Then in a way you're not centered, you're out of control. And I think that's a good time to check in for therapy. Also, if you find yourself using coping mechanisms that are not helpful, like trying to drink yourself to sleep because you can't sleep, or to calm yourself down, finding yourself having extreme temper tantrums, then you know that you need to. Something is off, and you do need an intervention.
Okay, all right, that makes sense. Okay, so back to another buzzword that I keep hearing, especially with the up and coming generation now, is the word anxiety. And people will, say things like, no, this gives me anxiety, and sometimes I find myself listening to people or reading stuff on social media where they say that, and I'm like rolling my eyes because I'm just like, please, do you even know what anxiety is? So help the people, especially us who are in, pseudo leadership relationships where you're acting as maybe a big brother, big sister, or like a cousin to people of this up and coming generation that are using this term more and more. How do we know that they're just being extra, or it's actually a thing that we need to pay attention and support the person if they're saying, no, this just gives me anxiety, or it flares up my anxiety? Speak to that so that we can stop rolling our eyes and maybe take some people a bit more seriously.
Well, anxiety firstly is a normal emotion, and if you don't have it, there is something wrong. So you should have anxiety. The problem comes if the anxiety is disrupting you. So if you get to a point where you cannot live life because of your anxiety, you cannot make sound judgment, then you have to intervene. So if you're speaking in public and you get anxious, that's okay.
Yeah.
But if you find that you can't even speak, you lose your sentences while you're speaking in public, then of course the anxiety is coming in the way. If you're anxious about a new trip that you're doing or a new role the next day, and that's okay. But if you find that you can't sleep the whole night, if you can't sleep for a little bit, you woke up a number of times, that's okay. That's normal. And the idea behind anxiety is that it should actually create a system in the body where the body is alert that more energy is needed for this situation, more concentration is needed for this situation. That's normal. Okay. But then if the anxiety persists, firstly, beyond the issue that you are dealing with, and secondly, when it's excessive, that it disrupts a person. Because, having been at a point of urgency, if you're constantly at that point, the body gets exhausted. It's too much energy driven in one direction, so you need an intervention. So I think that, even the word depression is abused. Somebody says, oh, this show is ended, I'm depressed.
I know, right? Please.
Haven't gotten my 20% naps, I'm depressed.
Yeah.
So it's also abused. And I think that when we say that it's a disorder, is that when it disrupts you, that you find that you cannot function, you cannot thrive, you cannot excel and be the person you are. If you cannot do that for a couple of moments, hours or something, that's not too bad. But if you find that now your life is disrupted, then you need an intervention in that regard.
Right. Another word that I think is also abused or getting to that point where it's now like overly used is the word triggered. And again, it's all over social media, it's in the shows we watch. That was just triggering. So what is a trigger? What is a real trigger? And as people who are going through life that have just come from this global trauma, how can we identify our triggers and then deal with them as and when they come about?
So triggers, from my understanding, and I'll say it from the mental health perspective, is something that stimulates an intense reaction in you. So it can be anything really, and it usually depends on what prior experience you've had. So if you've been bullied, for example, for maybe your smile, if somebody says you have a nice smile, that would trigger you because you have a past experience. But then for someone else, that is not a trigger because, it doesn't mean anything. It's just a neutral statement. So essentially, the word trigger usually means that, there is some past experience a person had, and then this incident is taking them back to that intense negative emotion that they've had. Yes. So in this case, I think what's important is understanding yourself, because sometimes, we blame a lot of people as having triggered us, but essentially it's because of what we have experienced or what we believe that it is a trigger. One word can mean nothing, and I'm gonna give this example. I think it's a weird example, but I'll give it nonetheless. When I was in school, we had a teacher for sex education, and he couldn't say certain words, certain body parts, because he was so shy. It was a girls' school. So, for example, he would use the word item for penis. And he would use the word perform for intercourse. So in our class, we couldn't use those words.
Wow.
Because they meant something else. So if you say, who's going to perform, everybody's just like... But that is a very neutral word. Do you see what I mean? So, and that's a lot like how triggers work, because of the background, the word item was never used. You cannot use the word item because it means something else. And yet it's a very neutral word,
Right.
So I think that's a lot of how triggers work. Yeah.
Back to the global trauma. Yeah. If there's someone watching that can notice that there's two versions of themselves. So there's the pre-pandemic version of themselves, and then there's a post-pandemic version, and they're different, however degree of the difference. But they can notice, like, okay, I'm different and I'm not feeling quite like myself, and they maybe are noticing certain symptoms, if that's the right word to use, that they're experiencing or that they began to experience during the pandemic and that have like lingered. What advice would you have for such a person about steps that they can take to resolve such a situation, or do some further investigation into what that might be? So like even in conversation with their friends and stuff, they'll use the statement or phrase like there's a before COVID me and there's an after COVID me, because they notice that distinction so much.
So a couple of things. Trauma changes us. That's for sure. It changes your perspective. It brings new insights into a situation. And believe it or not, there is such a thing called post-traumatic growth.
Oh,
yes.
Growth.
Yes.
Okay.
So for some people, after trauma, depending on what goes on in their lives and what ingredients they have around them, good things can actually happen after trauma. And for some people, they may experience the negative, the post-traumatic stress disorder, for example. And I think what's important is to recognize some of them. You just need to do some interventions, some self-help interventions. And you having said that just reminded me of one of the reasons why I wrote this book, which is How Can I Make the Pain Go Away? Yeah. And so this is a self-help book that you can use to deal with some of the stuff that you might have to deal with. And if you still realize that, you're not able to help yourself through a self-help book of some kind, you may need to go to therapy, depending on how much this is disrupting your life and how much it is causing a negative impact on your life. But I think what's important is also to remember that trauma changes us. Yeah. It's very difficult to be the same because a whole new dimension comes in, like I was already talking about how that, in what world would you think a handshake is dangerous? But we got to a point where handshakes became dangerous. And there's some people up to now, they will not shake hands because of that. There's some people who are still wearing masks because of what they experienced during that time. And there's some people who are still not getting out of their house. They're still indoors and keeping life to themselves as much as possible because it's dangerous out there. So I think the recognition that, it may have changed you for the better or for the worse, it may have given you some insight in one way or the other, is important. Do a stock take, figure out where that is, and then do the relevant intervention to get yourself to be the best version of who you are.
Right. Thank you. You've shared so many nuggets that if people are paying attention, they've picked up so many life hacks from this conversation. But before we go, any final thoughts to the person that is looking to prioritize their mental health, like looking to actually say, you know what, I want to make this a priority and I want to begin to do some of the things that Dr. Maria has mentioned. What words of advice, parting words of advice would you have for such a person?
Well, firstly, mental health is about your whole life. It's not a dimension or one aspect of your life that you remove from the rest of your life. In order for you to live a full life, in order for you to be the best version of who you are, you have to pay attention to your mental health because the brain is the control center of who you are. So you have to consider the aspects that make you healthy as a person. So you need to think about your physical being firstly, and that involves your diet, your exercise, and nutrition in every aspect the alcohol or smoking that you do or don't do that can affect your brain. And then you have to consider your social aspect, your social networks. What are you putting into the person you are that can give you a positive balance? And then you also have to think about your spiritual aspects. Remember, we're talking about a holistic person. So you have to think about all those things in terms of even your emotions and every other aspect, really, your finances and also your career, your profession. They affect who you are. So you have to pay attention to each and every aspect of your life. And one of the simplest things that I like to share is the base model, where you focus on your body. What are you doing for your body to keep healthy? And A is your sense of achievement. What are you doing in life to feel that you are conquering, you're achieving, you're doing something meaningful, either in terms of contributing or personal development? And then the C is the connection. How are you connecting to people that are vital in your life? And the E is the enjoyment or enrichment. What are you doing for fun? I mean, life can't all be about seriousness and stuff. So, yes, I hope you can remember that.
Wow. Thank you so much for everything that you've shared. I've learned a lot from this conversation. I'm like, I need to write stuff down if I forget. But yeah, this has been an amazing chat, an enlightening conversation. And I really believe that those watching will benefit a few things from listening to this chat. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for having me. I'm glad I came.
Awesome. All right, famous warriors, thanks for watching this video. If you're like myself, I'm sure you've gotten so much out of this, and there's one or two people who you can definitely share this video with, so that they can also glean some information, some nuggets of information from this. Don't forget, even as you take care of your whole self, your whole being, as you prioritize your mental health, the chance to fight is a privilege, and you are definitely worth the fight.